Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. We have made it to Friday. Please share your name and institution in the chat to say hello. My name is Barb. I'm the Director of Community Engagement here at the OEN, and we're really excited for today's community conversation on harnessing AI and open education beyond publishing. And today's event was shared on the CCC OER listserv, so I'm aware I see some familiar faces here today, which is really exciting. And then I'm also aware that we've got some new folks joining us as well. So I want to note that these community conversations are monthly events that we host within our OEN community. So if you're interested in joining or learning more about our membership benefits, I will drop my email in the chat. And you are most welcome to reach out, and I'd be happy to set up a meeting or share more on what it's like to be a part of our community. We are really looking forward to this conversation today as our event planning committee noted how many sessions address AI use naturally as it relates to open publishing. And we wanted to have a specific conversation about other ways in which AI might support the other facets of open education initiatives that you all might be working on, such as discovery or just general workflow efficiencies, especially given the capacity limitation that we know a lot of our colleagues are facing. So, as always, we want to create a constructive space for both discussing these things as well as any ethical considerations that come along with AI use. So, before we begin with the artificial intelligence portion of our session, we're going to get started with a little icebreaker that grounds us in our natural environment this morning. It's a thunderstormy April showers kind of day here in Minnesota, so we'd love to hear what is your favorite spring flower? Please drop this in the chat. Or if you're in a place that isn't necessarily super springy, do feel free to share just your favorite flower in general. My colleague Karen's love for native plants is always an inspiration to me, so I'm going to go with the pasque flower today, which is a new addition to my native garden this year. So while we wait for you to share your favorite flowers in the chat, we've got a few ground rules outlined here to ensure that we've got a welcoming space for today's discussion. And we would like to note that this beginning part of the community conversation will be recorded and we'll end the recording before our group discussion. So our guiding rules today are to be here now, avoid multitasking as best you can. Share airtime, allowing everyone the opportunity to speak, fostering mutual respect. We hope that we are mindful of any power dynamics and how that might affect the conversation, use mindful language, and then noting that all ideas and questions are welcome. So we hope that this is a space you can share and feel comfortable being both open and bringing your curiosity to the conversation. All right. So, oh, Iris, lilacs. Lovely. Elegant Clarkia. Oh, that's you, Karen. Yes, the California wildflower. I have not heard of that one, so you'll have to share a picture at some point. Daffodils. The lilac smell is just something that I think is such a lovely indicator of spring, as is Lily of the Valley. And your herb garden, Robin, we'd love to hear about that more at some point. Yum. Okay, so just to thank you for sharing that. To give a little run over of the agenda, we are going to begin with our three panelists sharing today. Then what we do is we go out into topical breakout rooms where you'll get a chance to have a small group discussion with related to a topic of your choice. Then we'll all group back together to debrief and share some closing remarks. So, to introduce today's panelists, we have Judy Thomas, who's the Director of Faculty Programs at the University of Virginia, followed by Magdalene Moy, the Instructional Technologist at Fort Hays State University, and Natasha Witten, Professor of History at Baton Rouge Community College. So, without further ado, I will pass things over to Judy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting us here today. I really appreciate it. You can see Bethany's name on this title slide as well. Bethany and I work really closely together on our OER efforts. So this is all as much her thinking as mine. 5 minutes is going to be a flyby, a little bit of the project background. The fellowship program that I'll be talking in a little more detail about is part of a larger project. UVA and ISKME collaborated on a project, received IMLS pilot funding, and so this is Bethany, Peter Musser, and Megan Simmons. Peter and Megan are from ISKME, and we were responding to what was then, that was 2 years ago, and still is the case, rapidly changing landscape, critical AI literacy gaps. The flood of information is only accelerated. Conversations rich, ongoing at individual institutions, certainly, but fragmented and hard to hold these conversations across institutions. So we were motivated by the desire to be able to address these issues in community. And part of this project is the Community Hub. And I'll just mention that OER, this project has a hub on OER Commons, and I'm sure many of you know about OER Commons. Feel free to look up the AI in OER Hub to see how collection development has been going since we first set it up. So here was our announcement for the fellowship program. We were looking to build a small cohort. Participants would engage with AI, generative AI tools, would curate and create resources. So add resources to the hub, and then collaborate, mostly in the form of group discussions, to explore the use of artificial intelligence in the service of open education. The curriculum was largely designed by Megan Simmons at ISKME. There are 8 fellows, 2 of whom were resource designers, and so we'll hear from 2 of those fellows in just a few minutes. It took place over 12 months. We were looking for OER leaders, mentors in K-12 and higher ed. And by leaders, I don't mean in an administrative way. I mean folks who were innovatively or courageously exploring, developing new ways to engage, inform, and in some cases, collaborate with their students. And so we drew from a pool of educators, librarians, technologists, and designers. And here are our 8 fellows, and you can run your eye over these folks. And what you can see is there are a variety of institution types, and also different kinds of roles were brought to the table. And this was part of our design. And I think this was a very beneficial part of this fellowship program, is that we had a wide variety of perspectives being brought to the table. So there were 12 facilitated sessions. The purpose, our overall purpose, engaged with the tools, but even more with strategies or approaches. Again, this notion of curating and creating resources to be added to OER Commons. The real point was to share perspectives in the intersection of AI and OER, drawing from these various backgrounds, skills, willingness to experiment, and then high value on participation with synchronous sessions and also ongoing discussion boards. So here were the topics. We can take a look at these topics and see they cover a broad range of issues and themes live for any of us who are dealing with AI and its possible application for open education. We did have guest speakers throughout. For instance, accessibility. The accessibility expert at ISKME was able to lead us through that session. So my own takeaways is this, and this is really the lead-in to the following presentations. I was so impressed by their thoughtful and innovative approaches in an open context to enrich teaching and learning. And we'll next hear from Natasha and Magdalene. I learned a tremendous amount from these fellows. I think that probably my time is up, although I forgot to put on my timer, so I will not go into sort of lessons learned or recommendations, but perhaps that can come up in further discussion.
Thanks so much, Judy. Over to you, Magdalene.
Yeah, I will start a timer so I don't go over. So I'm Magdalene Moy, and I actually chair our generative AI task force at our university. And so one of the librarians on our task force asked me to apply for the fellowship. And so I was really grateful to get the opportunity to engage in this fellowship. Um, the resource that I built for it really tries to get at what I see as a need from our faculty. The number one ask from our faculty is how do I catch students using AI? And it's maybe a little like, heartbreaking when I say like, we don't encourage you to do that. Don't do that. Like, there's no good way to do that. And you're going to be out on a limb if the student calls you out on it. So the resource that I designed, is really trying to take a backwards design approach to using AI and how you can do it thoughtfully. And so starting with a learning objective, why you might use it. So if the faculty member isn't coming to me trying to catch students using AI cheating, they're trying to just implement AI. And one of the other issues that we see with that is that they want to use like a new tool, and the tool is cool. And so this OER resource that I created is really trying to set the faculty members or K-12 educator up for why you might actually want to use AI in your classroom, in your context. So the original proposal that I had, when I applied for this fellowship, I talked about a chatbot that I built for clinical psychology here on campus, working side by side with our faculty to build a simulation where the chatbot acts like um, as a patient, and the student is meant to go through their regular clinical intake interview to try to diagnose the patient. And so um, this was this was a collaborative process with the faculty members to basically replace what they have as a paper and pencil learning activity for their students. So I use that as a model to try to think about other ways that people might approach this. So I provide in the book a conceptual framework, and I do rely on Lowe's AI literacy framework, if you're familiar with that, to try to scaffold how you might implement AI in your classroom and how you might support AI literacy throughout the process. Um, I talk about this clinical psychology bot, but I also give other examples that have come from our university. So one of the other things that you might think about implementing with AI is like in writing. So I pull an example from our English professors who have a very scaffolded learning assignment where the student needs to draft an entire report. And so the first part of the writing is done without AI, so that they brainstorm. And this is something that I think is kind of interesting because a lot of times people will say like, oh, I use AI to brainstorm. And the argument that the faculty member pushes against for this particular assignment is that it can also narrow the scope of the student's thinking if you use it to brainstorm first, if that's like your initial point. And I think that's something that our students are starting to do when you tell them, oh, you can use it to brainstorm, then they're going first the AI to brainstorm and then naturally narrowing the topic down to whatever AI had done for them rather than trying to think about it before engaging in that space. And then they are allowed to use AI for outlining and then also for drafting as a counterpoint and for grammatical errors and maybe for transitions between their paper, but then in their final draft, they're not allowed to use AI. So trying to be very specific about why or how you might engage your students in actually using it. And I'm almost up on time. So there's a couple other pieces in there, but one of the feedback that I got from the fellowship that was really important to me to include in the resource that I created was providing meaningful assessment. So each of the examples that I use, I try to talk about how you might actually assess the process of their learning rather than the product of their learning. And that way AI is implemented in a way that's meaningful to the learning process. And I'll turn it over to Tasha.
Sure. Thank you, Magdalene. So, as you heard from Judith, there were two types of fellows, and Magdalene was one of our resource creators. I was not a resource creator. I was simply a participant in the process. And my excitement about the program came from my previous interactions with OER and being sort of an early adopter, I guess, of navigating the classroom with AI as soon as ChatGPT went public in 2002. So my background is very interdisciplinary. Starting in biology and then moving to literature and then moving to history. I primarily teach history now to 1500, so world history, and I teach with traditional students, I guess, and also a large number of dual enrollment students who are ninth graders. So we traditionally think of dual enrollment as being a little older, but we have an early college academy, so I'm usually with 13 to 14-year-old students who are getting their first taste both of high school and college. And have grown up with this technology that does a lot of writing for them, does a lot of thinking for them. And so seeing first the invitation from LOUIS, which is our excellent Louisiana Library Network. I consider librarians the OG interdisciplinary scholars of the world, right? So that network was able to, through a number of really great grants, encourage us in the college space, both private, public, 4-year, 2-year, to create OER for all of our general education courses. And this project started really long before AI was public or really being used. Once AI became a part of the conversation, we then began introducing the idea of not just maybe having our own writing, having some AI influenced writing, and how that might change or shift some of the examples that we were taking from students, or rewriting tone, those sorts of things. So it was LOUIS that recommended that I first do that. And then I got involved with the Rebus Foundation because they did our onboarding. And after completing that process and putting together some textbook for Western Civilization 2, I heard about the fellowship on OER and AI and really appreciated the year of community with educators that spanned a lot of different areas. I don't know about you, if you're working as a librarian, I'm sure you sometimes hear from folks in different contexts, but I'm always going upstream, trying to figure out where the student in front of me comes from, what their experience is, what their previous classroom experiences have been, what their previous interactions with AI have been. And so if you go to the next slide, with my few remaining minutes, I just wanted to give you 3 resources, which I'll also put in the chat, which I think effectively expand or give you some ways of thinking about this conversation beyond the publishing aspect of OER. The first you would probably want to use mostly with faculty or other librarians or staff to enter a conversation. So I don't know if you've read The Empire of AI by Karen Howe. It is a deep dive into the company OpenAI and Sam Altman's brief ouster from the company, the way that Anthropic formed as in sort of a counterpoint. And it tells a lot of the stories of the working conditions for contract employees who did a lot of the data checking for these large language models. So I think it opens a lot of additional conversations about it, not just how we are using it today, but what does it mean? A lot of faculty are now talking about asking students to interact with AI, and there are real ethical concerns that I think we put in the background, and I think Karen brings a lot of those to the surface. There's a second resource that I think I use a little bit more with students. It is divided into lessons, and that's how to thrive in a ChatGPT world. What I love about this resource, if you take a look at the link, is that these are 2 faculty members from the University of Washington who they did an earlier course sort of introducing AI, but in this, they're really breaking apart all the facets that we've talked about. And you could use just a chapter, just one lesson, or use multiple. It is really well done. It's very immersive. And at the end of each of the units, there's a very brief video done by one of the author, Carl T. Bergstrom's son, who just graduated from high school last year. And those videos really show you the different ways that a teenager versus a professor or an educator might think about some of the changes that AI is bringing to us. Finally, I think most of you are probably familiar with the Transparency in Learning network or framework. I am a part of another group that started working really heavily in transparency in learning and teaching and talking about the ways that being transparent about when we're using AI to put together our teaching materials would be helpful to students. One of the things that I think something like Tilt reveals is the way that we talk about transparency differently in the secondary classroom and the high school classroom versus the college classroom. So when we opened this conversation with college faculty, they started talking about, oh, okay, so I put my learning objectives out there first, and I create things thinking about this. And since I sort of live in both worlds, I was like, yes, that's the bell ringer, the exit ticket. There's been a lot of pushback in K through 12 because all of these sort of transparent processes have been put out there. And AI entered that conversation by taking the burden off of faculty, right? That now, all of those lesson plans, et cetera, could be written and posted very competently by a machine. Obviously, that is not necessarily what is happening in the classroom. And so we need, to continue thinking about that. So those, again, are some things, some food for thought as you move into your discussion time. So thank you.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you so much for sharing those resources, and to Judy and Magdalene as well for sharing your experience.